So we have an exciting program for you tonight. We've got a great speaker who's going to talk about spacesuits. So if you actually want to go into space, space wants to kill you really, really bad. So we're going to hear about how you might bring your own life support system with you. We're also going to have our typical Astrophotos of the month, where we'll highlight some members' work, Astronomy League Observing Certificate, our observing program, and also a special mini program on the solar observing, and an update on our loaner program. Francisco's put together some slides for us. We have quite the inventory of loaner scopes available to our members. So we want to kind of update you on what our policies there are about, and what we have available. So before we start with our main speaker, I'm going to have Justin introduce him in a couple of minutes. As the president, you know, I have to make all of the official sort of announcement sorts of things. So first of all, those of you who are partake in our Groups IO mailing list, if you're not on our Groups IO mailing list, please sign up. If you tried Groups IO and you left, give us another try. We have adopted some new policies for Groups IO so that we can be very clear about the sort of things that are acceptable. A lot of us have a lot of very real, legitimate beefs with social media, mailing lists, and things like Facebook. And we've had all kinds of adventures this week with our IO Groups mailing list, and also with our Facebook. And we've had to shut down and delete some posts and things like that. So we do have an official policy. Last week at the board meeting, we met, and we have an official policy for our social media and Facebook. I'm not going to read you the whole policy because it's very boring, but I will drag a PDF of the policy into the chat window in a minute. There it is. Nope, there it is. There's the chat window, and I'll drag that over. And if I'm doing this right, it should show up so that you can download it. Or maybe I have to select the file. Okay, let me select the file. Okay, my documents, CFAS, important documents. If only I could talk and do stuff at the same time. Groups policy, here it is. So here's the whole official policy. I will give you the executive summary, which is, A, be a grown-up, be an adult. Don't call people names. This is the Central Florida Astronomical Society, not Mrs. Chisholm's 8th grade classroom. Also, no politics. We are actually forbidden by law as part of our 501c from engaging in politics. It's also just not good karma for us. If you want to talk about civil rights, if you want to talk about diversity, that's fine, but do not, or how can we increase diversity in the astronomy field, that's fine, but we don't need any posts that align with certain political parties. Let's face it, if we had a problem with killing puppies in this country, we would have a Republican view and a Democratic view, and they would both be diametrically opposed, and they both hate each other. And that's a sad state of things, and we're not going to get involved in that. It's not my place, and it's not your place on the CFAS media to try to change it. Our own personal Facebook page. We all have our own personal Twitter page. Now, there's been a lot of stuff in the news, and I'm not gonna stick my head in the sand about the problem we have, in this country and for all of human history, really, with with discrimination and racism. And CFAS actually last year we introduced a code of conduct, and I'm going to read just a little bit, and then I'll drag the PDF over maybe during the talk so that I'm not killing time doing it. But our code of conduct says, let's see, CFAS is committed to an environment in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity. Each individual has the right to a professional atmosphere that promotes equal opportunities and prohibits discriminatory practices, including harassment. And I'm going to kind of screeze through here. In order to keep this commitment, CFAS maintains a strict policy of prohibiting unlawful harassment of any kind, including sexual harassment, harassment based on race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, sex, age, physical or mental disabilities, or any other characteristic protected by state. That means all of that stuff, even if it's not protected, but if there's something that's protected by law that we forgot to mention, that also is included as well. And that's it. That's my, I got to be dad for a while and caution the kids that they need to behave. Please do so that we don't have to make a continuing issue of it. This is the Astronomy Club. I've said this at previous meetings. This is our refuge. All week long, there's slings and arrows and fiery stuff coming at us from all directions, and nobody likes anybody for whatever reason. And here's a place where we can identify together a common love for the sky and of science, and we have something in common. And I really think that that's a key to help making the world a better place too. See each other as human beings, see each other as having something in common. And so it's no small thing that we can get together and obsess over focal lengths and pixel sight and cameras and spacesuits and going to Mars, because we all have those common dreams. And when we see each other that way, it helps us see each other as a group, as we're all together. We're all in this together on this little blue ball moving around the sun. All right, and now I'm going to mute myself and probably turn off my video too. I'm going to let Justin talk for a minute, introduce our main speaker, and then I'm going to sit back and enjoy the talk along with the rest of you.
Right on. Hey, I wanted to do something real quick though. I don't know if we've ever done this before, probably not, because it's only been the third meeting, but somebody just had a birthday the other day. They turned the ancient age of 35. Can we all sing happy birthday to Derek real quick, like a bunch of dorks? Take yourself off mute in 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Oh, this is horrible.
That's right.
Happy
birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And many more.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate that. My favorite reaction was Bill Kostring's reaction. Thank you, Bill. I appreciated that very much. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate that. I didn't really have a great last couple of days, so that really helped me out feeling that. So thank you. All right, Justin.
Okay, we're back. Hey, Ryan, how are you?
All right, hanging in there.
All right. Well, thanks for coming out, Dr. Ryan. I appreciate it very much. The whole group, I think, is going to love this talk. I'm just going to read off your bio here a little bit and then let you get started. Dr. Ryan Kobrick is an assistant professor of spaceflight operations in the College of Aviation at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. He's also the principal investigator of the SUIT lab, and SUIT is an acronym for Spacesuit Utilization of Innovative Technology Laboratory. And Dr. Kobrick received his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Queen's University, a master's of space studies degree from the International Space University, master's of science degree in aerospace engineering from Pennsylvania State University, go Pens, a doctorate of philosophy degree in aerospace engineering sciences. His focus was bioastronautics from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and his NASA GSRP fellow PhD work with NASA Glenn Research Center was titled Characterization and Measurement, Standardization of Lunar Dust Abrasion for Spacecraft Design and Operations. Ryan also participated as a crew member of simulated Mars missions 5 times in Utah, and he was selected for a 100-day simulation in the high Canadian Arctic on Devon Island. Ryan was chairman and president of Yuri's Night from 2010 to 2018. In 2015, Dr. Kobrick was inducted by the International Astronautical Federation into the Young Space Leaders Recognition Program. In his free time, he enjoys being a husband and father. He plays ice hockey, sails, races, scuba dives, skis, hikes, and enjoys photography and filmmaking. So you're fitting in really well here. Welcome, Dr. Ryan Kobrick.
Cool, and thank you, Justin, for having me. If anytime anyone needs a clarification, just fire something in the chat window or just unmute yourself. Stop me, that's fine. What I'd like to do is, shotgun through these slides as fast as possible because I'd rather have more of a discussion and Q&A. But I had found it really hard to cut things out, so I did my best to whittle it down. I don't want to PowerPoint you to death either. So without further ado, let's take a look at whatever I prepared today, because I don't remember now, right? Now, we've got some key topics that I want to cover. I am just going to get things set up before I officially want to make sure the chat window's open. And if you are going to ask a question, or even if you're not, I'm always for people having their video on, so I know there's people there. I couldn't convince my students to have their videos on, but it's always nice to see that there's some reaction. So even if it's not a good reaction, it's better than no reaction, right? So getting into the science of it, today, Spacesuit Up is the title, just because spacesuits are kind of cool. They're the focus, as you'll see here. So, a quick clarification, as we all know, and I tried to find out, just a small story, a small something to link everything together. But I've been a big fan of the moon my whole life. I've been a big fan of Mars. But, there's something about looking up in the night sky and that familiarity of the moon being right there is a kind of an instant connection. So, if I were to be one day lucky enough to travel to space, honestly, I'd rather go to the moon, even though Mars is really our ultimate destination, because I'd rather spend a year being able to look up at Earth. I think that would be just absolutely stunning, and I think it would be very inspirational for all the types of things that could be created. And obviously, the more different, diverse backgrounds we send up there, the more diverse thinking will also enable. So this is a photo from 17 years ago when I was visiting a fellow friend from the International Space University that was doing their internship in San Francisco. We went to an Oakland star party. And so these star parties, even if you get 10, 15 people, they could be a big deal to other people that might be visiting, or maybe it's the first time they've ever seen Saturn's rings. And I think those are really important. And so something that's not really part of the presentation here, but one thing that I have my students do in my lab is actively participate in outreach activities during our astronomy open houses that the university runs every month. So that's kind of a side thing. And I make sure my students know that moon is capitalized. It's the name. They seem to still do lowercase, but that's okay. The press seems to think it's okay, even though NASA's now corrected the standard for that as well. So we're going to talk about Spacesuit 101. We're going to talk about space analogs. So those are the two kind of mini topics that I'm going to cover. Okay, I have got the chat side working, so that looks good there. So Spacesuit 101. Spacesuits are cool. Everything in the vacuum of space is right there in that smallest, world's tiniest spacecraft, if you will. All things needed to support life. Of course, it is limited by oxygen, power, and other consumables, but everything you need is right there. So I think that in itself is pretty inspiring and something to think about for anything related to design. And so I've been inspired by sci-fi, not necessarily these things in these orders, but these are just some things that are just like kind of iconic looking. In the very bottom middle, you'll see the way that NASA used to do motion capture or video capture for these spacesuits to look at their reach envelopes. And that's something specific that my lab works on, so I can show you more of that very soon. I've been lucky enough to wear all kinds of simulated spacesuits. So I've been part, as Justin said in my intro, part of 5 missions to the Mars Desert Research Station and 1 to the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station. That's me crawling out of the Houghton Impact Crater on Devon Island on the left. And then the bottom right is Utah, and the top right is just in the lab at Embry-Riddle. So again, I love spacesuits, so there's just one of my photographs from Huntsville. So overall, there's really fundamentals that need to be, I guess, understood in order to understand life support in general and how to design it. And overall, the number one function that needs to be, the number one kind of requirement is to keep the person alive. You could throw them inside of an airbag with a bit of oxygen, and if they survive, that's great. That's what you need for your basic design. Well, if you want them to actually be able to do work, be useful, then you really need to be able to have them be able to function, right? You need those hands. Hands are really the number one tool, especially in weightlessness and your zero G. You need that to use tools. You need that to actually relocate around the space station. That's the way you move. So being able to function is the next step. And then the kind of third level is comfort. So if we can make them comfortable, prevent injuries, even the psychological side of comfort needs to be taken into this, especially for if you're on Mars and wearing a spacesuit over and over and over again. So obviously hygiene fits into that as well. So the kind of the rule of threes, if you're not familiar with, you need 3 seconds of pressure. You need 3 minutes. Without 3 minutes of oxygen, that's the end of your brain. 3 hours for shelter. If you're in an extreme environment, then the conditions are really bad. Without shelter for 3 hours, that could be it as well. You can survive 3 days without water, and you can actually survive 3 weeks without food. Although, of course, you'll atrophy and be extremely weak as time passes in those various periods. So I wouldn't recommend testing it out. I don't know if this is going to work, but I have a video on this next slide here from advice from another doctor, if you will. So let's try it out. It's a short clip, and maybe I see Justin's video. Maybe you can give me a thumbs up after it starts if the audio is working. Cool, I can't hear it.
So how does space kill you? I'm glad you asked. The main problem is pressure. There isn't any. So don't hold your breath or your lungs will explode. Blood vessels rupture. Exposed areas swell. Fun fact, the boiling temperature of water is much lower in a vacuum, which means that your sweat and your saliva will boil, as will the fluid around your eyes. You won't notice any of this because 15 seconds in, you passed out as oxygen bubbles formed in your blood, and 90 seconds in, you're dead. Any questions? Yes.
What's this got to do with crop rotation?
I don't know. Space is great, isn't it?
You're missing it, aren't you?
All right, so that was weird for me because I was silent, but I've seen it so many times that I know that she's asking about crop rotation. But it's always fun when you connect science fiction with what you're working on. So anyway, human needs, consumables. This is everything that needs to go into your body and everything that comes out of your body. Nitrogen is just there for the ride. You don't actually need nitrogen. So between oxygen, water, and food to get energy, that's what you need. And there's the quantities and metric as well, if you're curious about that. So overall, these are the things that need to be taken care of by a spacesuit, at least for a spacesuit that you might be wearing for longer duration than just being launched. So we'll talk about the difference between suits as well coming up here. Next slide, come on. There we go. One extra kind of throughput is money. It's, you know, the classic program project manager problem of cost, schedule, and everything else. So that has to be factored in as well in terms of how we produce and design spacesuits. Overall, you really have the human at the center of design. All those inputs and outputs have to go somewhere. This is just kind of a basic schematic of a landing, actually a lunar lander system, where you have those inputs connected to the various subsystems of the lunar lander. So overall, though, there's also an aspect of, well, you need to be an astronaut. I guess this is a mostly adult crowd, so I can say don't be a dick. But for the most part, being human is key to actually being able to make this system function, someone who's rigorous in testing these things and making sure they work and everything else. So current spacesuits, EVA and IVA. EVA, I think you guys are mostly familiar with this, but just in case, extravehicular activity, it's outside of your main spaceship. Those are the two spacesuits on the left, the EMU from the USA and the Orlan in the middle from Russia. And on the far right is the so-called IVA suit, which was the only game in town until the recent Demo 2 launch just happened just over a week ago. So if we take a look, this is the EMU for in all its fun things. Some of my students, I have them draw the spacesuit at the very beginning of my spacesuit class and tell them to label it. One of them wrote the Darth Vader boxy thing on the front of the spacesuit. That's actually the display control module. It's where they get information and can control the cooling loop that goes into their liquid cooling garment that they wear underneath to help with making sure the astronauts are regulated. So DCM is what that acronym is for there. So these are some of the coming up suits and new suit, you could say. So on the far left is the XEMU that NASA wants to use for the return to the moon, or onto the moon, or back to the moon, or however you want to phrase it, doesn't matter, just go to the moon. The next one on the left, from the left, is the SpaceX suit. It's a basic IVA suit. It can get the astronauts down in an emergency. The next one is the Boeing Blue suit made by David Clark, used for the CST-100 Starliner capsule. And then on the far right is the OX, or what's going to be used as the Orion survival suit. And this is inside of Lockheed's Orion vehicle, also made by David Clark. So David Clark has a bit of a monopoly on the spacesuit game, besides SpaceX making their own suit. ILC Dover, who made the historic Apollo pressure suits, are also working on their own IVA suit. On the left there, the black suit, and the white, EVA suit. I'm just trying to move my control panel over just so I can see what's there. And then the far right is a spacesuit that's actually very similar to the Russian one that's being developed in India. And it says that my screen sharing is paused. Why is it paused? Resume share. All right, are we back in business? I think so. So on the far right there, we see the suit being developed by India, because they do want to get into the human spaceflight game as well. So I just want to talk about the suit lab. I think this is where I'm going to play the other video. So let me just back up a second. Actually, what I'll do is I'll do the video at the end if there's time, and we can send the link around as well. But it might make more sense after you see what we've been working on to then look at the video, unless you've already looked at it, because otherwise you might be like, what are they doing there? So let's power through this a little bit. We've had the opportunity to work with different groups to collaborate on spacesuit research. On the left side are pictures from our testing with FIT. They have one of these Final Frontier Design IDA spacesuits. It's a Final Frontier Design is trying to compete with David Clark to create a low-cost, highly adjustable suit versus it being all custom-made like the SpaceX suit is. And on the right-hand side is actually a newer version of their suit, the blue one, where we were actually testing it with them before their NASA Flight Opportunities Program campaign zero-G flights that took place out of Sanford in November of a few years ago. So we've been able to work with partners because we do not have a spacesuit of our own for testing like this in the suit lab. We do have a U-2 spy plane spacesuit in our cabinet that we can take out and kind of look at the materials and the layers, and the students can get familiar with the technology, but it's not something that we can pressurize, unfortunately. So we would want a suit in the future. These are some of the projects kind of from our early beginnings, looking at video capture. That was kind of our first step. We've sent instructions to High Seas, which is in Hawaii. It's a space analog, and we'll talk about analog shortly. And they were able to do these different ranges of motion using video capture. And then we did our analysis using video techniques. And we've gone all over the world, including the deserts of Oman, to Hawaii, as I mentioned, to Nepal, and also to Poland. So this is, there's a little animation here. It just shows you how our motion capture works. Basically, you put these little reflective markers on and use an IR camera to reflect back and forth to get the signal. We started off with, I think, 2 cameras that did absolutely nothing, but that's what was the startup, I guess you could say, of the lab. And then we built up to 9 cameras, which is actually pretty smooth for a seated person to do all this range of motion work. And if you look in the middle, you'll see kind of the 3-angle diagram there. The first that starts with 160 degrees, and then moving on to 91 and 90 degrees. Well, as soon as you put the suit on, you've already lost half of your range of motion in your shoulder in abduction, adduction. And even pressurized, it's about the same, but you've totally lost that ability to reach over your head. What that means is if you are in an emergency situation and you have to actually use your IVA spacesuit, just say there's a rapid depressurization or a fire or something else happening, that means you would not be able to reach anything over your head. You would be able to reach stuff just, bent elbow slightly over your head, like the top of your head, but that's about it. So when it comes to safety and design, you want to make sure you can reach the critical things. It's a little laggy here, and it kind of skipped. These are just to let you know, we do have a YouTube page with all our videos on it. These videos are just of the motion capture test. I'll play the bottom right one, see if it's embedded and working, but it just shows you in high speed all the different motions of the arms. So that's unpressurized, and then the next video will be pressurized. And so you can see that when it pressurizes, it almost lifts above their head. So this suit does not fit this person properly. It needs to be tighter and pulled down. And if you watch the SpaceX launch, you'll notice that their helmet, like when they were pressurized, doing a pressurized test, it like raised above their head and they couldn't really see properly. Again, in an emergency, that'll get them home safe. That's what really matters. Okay, so let's go into space analogs. Is there any questions about suits before we do that? I'll kind of backwards, sideways go here. And thanks for posting the video, Trisha. And we'll take a look at some of these things as well. That's for our channel. Feel free to unmute yourself. I'll stop sharing actually, so you can, if we want to just do a quick side chat here. Okay.
Sure. Ryan, was there any kind of, or will there be any kind of like post-mortem done on the SpaceX? How well they worked during the flight? Does that get shared with like, the public and organizations such as yourself, or is it all proprietary?
No. Yeah, SpaceX does everything in-house, and they actually brought people in. Well, actually, over about 10 years ago, they were interviewing for the spacesuit engineer position. I interviewed for that, and they weren't quite ready yet, but they were collecting information at the time, getting ideas about design and how they would want to move their human spaceflight program forward with the capsule that they were going to call Dragon. So it was very early. And the companies they brought in, these companies thought they were actually going to win the contract. They thought that they had such a good relationship with Elon and other people that they were shoo-in to be hired. Well, after their week or 2 weeks of on-site exchange conversations, SpaceX said thank you, and then that was it. They didn't hire them at that point, and they started working towards their own design. And they actually hired a filmmaker to help with the design because Elon wanted it to look cool. I think there's a bit of a generational gap possibly. I don't know. I haven't done a proper survey. Personally, I think it looks okay. I think the silver suits of like Mercury are what look really cool to me and more like futuristic than the sleek, basic black and white. The technology, though, is really cool. The gloves on the SpaceX spacesuit are actually touchscreen. You can use touchscreen technology. They have a very simple integrated port on the leg where it's everything in one. So the comms, the airflow, everything is going into one spot. So that's nice and streamlined. And it's actually all one piece. So they actually unzip the inseam of the legs and they crawl up the crotch into the helmet, into the spacesuit, with the hands open, and then they actually put the glove over and zip them up. So that's nice to think when you think about it. It's like when you take your glove off while you're in a kind of spacecraft environment where you're not necessarily going to take your whole suit off, you're unzipping it and it doesn't float away. It's just still there. So that part I think is pretty impressive. Again, this is a design that's really only meant for IVA. You wouldn't want to have zippers and things like that on the moon. They clog with dust, which is actually more of my research background area. And there'd be a lot of mechanical failures, and you eventually would lose some of your pressure rating as well. So I don't think they'll share. So it's more of up to the community to kind of discuss the suit and see what we can get out of it, unless they want to actually talk about it or publish something down the line.
Excellent.
Okay. So let me share again. Let's go to part 2. Feel free to like backwards populate your questions. We can always come back to them and do it that way as well. So that, and then pop that open. I did close the chat window just because I couldn't see my own screen. So it's I couldn't even click on anything to move it forward. So
I'll relay to you if you need. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've got your nodding head in the corner. So we'll use that as my indicator to either slow down or wait for a second here. So space analogs. This is a lot of fun to talk about, a lot of fun to experience too. So as you know, as astronomers, this is not to scale or realistic at all. But what I like about this rendering that came out actually during the Bush administration, Bush 2 administration, was they were talking about the kind of the steps towards Mars, the moon, Mars, and beyond kind of thought, if you will. And so what I like about this is that you kind of stop and say, well, if you're going to say that, then there's actually a lot of steps that fall in between all those different things. It's not as simple as 1, 2, 3, and go and outwards. So analog studies really fit in the middle of that. Space analogs, a location with one or more aspect of actual spaceflight to prepare us for actual future exploration. So there's key features. There's the environment itself, the temperature, how remote it is, the topography, the mineralogy. It could be reduced gravity as well. So all those variables are really important for picking the right spot. It could be a mission or task. So it can either be in a simulation where you purposefully are going to a research station and saying, we're in a Mars simulation, or it could be serendipitous, where people who are living underwater, they might take data on them because they were living in close confined spaces for a month or two, dependent on their life support. And we've all had a taste of that over the last few months of the physical distancing and isolation, and I think everyone has a kind of a feel now for what it might be like to be on one of these simulations, but not to the extreme of what these things are usually how they're run. So what's a Mars analog? Well, that's simple. It's just one of these places that match as many variables as possible to be just like Mars. And so the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah, which you can see in the 3 photos, you can see one main photo of the station here, an older one. I'll have a newer one to show you later, is in an area of Utah that's ancient salt lake bed. Could be analogous to the type of research that you might be doing in an ancient kind of aquatic area of Mars as well. It's very isolated. It's the working conditions. It looks like Mars. So when you're there, you really feel, I guess you could say, engaged or engulfed or whatever you want to say in the simulation. Like it really feels like you're part of a crew there. So the geology, biology is actually pretty similar, and it is exciting because everywhere you go it looks brand new, even if you revisit these places over and over. So analog research has a lot of advantages. Of course, there's disadvantages, but I want to talk about some of the advantages. So the photos there, you see the real deal of Apollo 17, Jack Schmitt, the only geologist that ever went to the moon. And on the right, Nemo 13, unnamed Aquanaut. I'm not really sure who it is, to be honest. I got that photo a long time ago. But you can see they're testing center of gravity for a simulated EVA, where they're scooping in the way that they would be doing sampling. So there's a lot of things that we can do underwater. So we're really testing at a fraction of the price. This is why NASA uses the Neutral Buoyancy Lab for weightless EVAs. And they're actually converted part of the NBL into an area where they're going to be doing lunar moonwalking simulations, including testing tools, which my students are involved with as well. So it's a proving ground, so you can actually test these things in extreme environments, see how they do. Obviously, it's not like the 1% atmosphere of Mars or the vacuum of the moon, but you do get a lot of the operational side of testing of it engaged with the crew. So the crew itself can be tested, so you can rapidly iterate between, okay, do we want 50% male, 50% female? Do we want to have 1 medical doctor, 2 medical doctors? How many geologists do we need? And so it's a way of really figuring out what's the best crew combination. And it does depend on the people too. And the people that will be going to these future locations are probably going to have a PhD in at least 2 or 3 of these areas anyway. And so that cross interdisciplinary part of the future of exploration is definitely part of it as well. And a variety of different mission profiles can be simulated. Overall, though, I'll show you a slide a little bit about this as well, is that the methodology for the protocols, like how do you take a proper field sample, how do you operate, how do you do communications with the time delay, all those things are done in these simulations, and most importantly, the data, so comparative planetology when you're actually at the location. So here's, again, just the same thing, the real deal versus space analogs. On the left there is actually one of my students on our study abroad trip to Greece in 2017. We did a simulated moonwalk, and that was really engaging. And myself and this student were the only ones who were the, I guess, aquanaut moonwalking people for this round. But then in future years, returning to Greece 2 more times, we actually had all the students in my class participating in this. And it was definitely a highlight for a lot of them. They speak about it a lot, like, oh yeah, we got to do a moonwalk. And, you know, it's so simple, but at the same time, it's just, when it's presented to them with in the right way, it's so engaging. So on the left there, they're just weighted with extra weight, so it feel like you would be walking on the moon. But the spacesuit, this was a question that I know that Justin had in his up his sleeve, was how heavy are these things? Well, the Apollo spacesuits were up to 300 pounds. And that's on Earth. So if you move over to the moon, 16G, it's about 50 pounds. But they also had an offset to the back in the backpack, the portable life support system. So if you look closely, you'll see weights on the tank of the diver on the right, and that's correcting her posture, but she's also having to really push to move forward. But her locomotion's a lot better than the person on the left, where they're like pitched all the way forward. So you really feel the difference when you, like, if you're wearing the simulated spacesuit, if you will. Again, I've been on lots of these simulations, so I've been really fortunate for that. Been on 84 of these simulated spacewalks, like not like the ones in the photos there, but during these analog missions. And so all that time kind of adds up to experience that might be helpful. So I want to talk about the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station for like 5-10 minutes. This is what it looked like when we arrived in May in 2007. We had a crew of 7 on our team, and we were in the Arctic for 4 months, but it takes time to set up and takes time to clean up at the end. So overall, we had 100 operational days, which actually lasted 101 Earth days, and I'll also mention that in a little bit. So if you're not familiar with Houghton Impact Crater on Devon Island, this is the map. This is where it's located, 75 degrees north. When we arrived, it was -40. You can pick your scale, Celsius, Fahrenheit, same difference at that. Freezing, windy, isolated, barely any communication. So one of the first things we had to do was set up this dinky little antenna to like point at a satellite on the horizon and just barely get enough like 1980s internet. So it's a hard life, even if you have instantaneous communication, which we took away from the mission later, like when we started the actual simulation, there's barely any information flow anyway. So you really need the crew to be prepared, and it takes a long time to download things. So here's the crew. I meant to add a new photo in there, but that's okay. We've had enough of those. And there's a lot of text here, but this just gives you an idea of what the mission was like. So 7 of us, 4 months, 20-minute communication delay. So if an email popped up and we knew it was, a reply to what we just sent, we'd have to wait the 20 minutes. Resolute is the closest city to Devon Island, and it's an hour plane ride, but that's if the weather is okay and if a plane is available, and the weather is not necessarily okay, especially in early May. It was kind of a mess. So we got in there pretty close to when we wanted to get to the island. It is the largest uninhabited island on Earth, and visible life is rare. We saw like lichen on rocks. We saw 1 bird over 4 months, and we saw polar bear tracks. So we never had to deal with the polar bears. It's cold. It's confined. Every time you went outside, you had to wear a spacesuit. And it actually has 24 hours of daylight, so it's analogous to a polar mission to another destination. Oops, trying to click here. Okay, so this is what our simulated spacesuits look like. That is literally a trash can and part of a fishbowl on our heads. The backpack has air fan filters that pull in the fresh, cool air from the outside world and into the helmet. We had to add on to the helmet to help with defogging. And the gloves essentially use ski gloves, and it matches the loss of dexterity that you would experience while being out on a spacewalk. And these bulky suits are pretty heavy and annoying, and enough to actually feel the hardship of what it would be like to work in the field. So when we arrived, though, like, was it really a moon analog? Because look how snow covered it was. It's like stretching through regolith. But that snow, as known, did not last very long. And soon enough, this is what it looked like. This is a photo at the end of the mission, but still, it's a rocky terrain. The HAB sits right on the edge of this crater. And there's the crater. So the HAB's just actually in front of me. And we had a photographer come out for the last week or so that we were there. And so I'm got my token hero shot here from Christian. And so you can see in the background, there's like not much there. There's all these rolling hills. There's different impact breccia that are within those gray hills. And so not a lot of diversity, but a lot of, I guess you could say, exposed history of the planet. And that's why we'd want to explore an impact crater, because we can really learn about the stratigraphy and the layering and the history of the planet and the solar system, history of the solar system and everything else. Here's just an assortment of photos from EVAs. What I wanted to mention here is that we did mostly biology and geology with this rock hammer drill. And so at first you're probably thinking, okay, so that must be difficult. But well, something about biology is that you don't want to cross-contaminate. So what we had to do before taking any sample was we actually had to sterilize that drill bit. What that meant was that we had to dip that drill bit, which has a 4-inch bore on it, into a bottle of isopropanol and set it on fire while wearing a spacesuit. And had to do that 4 times for each sample site, because we had to go down, I guess, a total of 16 inches for this particular study. Also, we were chasing the permafrost layer, and the permafrost layer gets lower and lower as things warm up, because when it's really cold, the permafrost is right at the top of the surface because everything is frozen, and that's caused by the water within the soil. And so as things heat up, it moves away. And on the far right, you can see, I think that is me standing in the hole. And the guy behind me is Matt Bamsey. He actually was, I think he would have been the next Canadian astronaut. He was like number 3, and they only selected 2 on their last selection. And Matt is just like going for a walk because he's just exhausted, because that's like digging your own grave when you have to dig down. It's about a meter, just under 3, close to 2 to 3 feet deep there. So hard work. There's just another fun shot, show you the habitat and the kind of desolation there, the isolation and everything else. So one other study that I specifically wanted to mention, because it's fun, was that we actually went on Mars time for an entire, I guess you could say, Martian month. So each day on Mars is actually closer to 25 hours. And what we did was we actually created a digital clock that our mission support helped us with. And we changed time zones roughly 40 minutes. I think we rounded just slightly just to make it a bit easier, and shifted going towards the west there every time zone. So for the first week or so, it really felt like we were jet lagged. We were hungry at the wrong time. But after that, we really kind of, I guess you could say, hit our stride, and we actually enjoyed having that extra hour within the day. So we actually lost a whole day by going around the world, because it took 37 operational days to do that. Very cool experiment. I think it's something that can be easily done, obviously, in a polar environment, because the way we handled nighttime was we just put boards up in the windows at a certain time. And so we just kept shifting that. So it was really strange to do low lighting, low sun lighting EVAs when it was like 3 o'clock in the morning on the real world. And the nice thing about that is that there are a couple other researchers that were up there, and we ended up not interacting with them. They're from NASA and the Canadian Space Agency. They're part of the Hot and Mars project, and they're about 1 kilometer away from this habitat. And so we didn't see them. So that was, nice that we didn't interact with them, because we want to maintain the isolation and the illusion, as the other word for it, the illusion of isolation and being on Mars. Okay, almost done. And then I definitely want to chat. So last photos on Mars. So that's just flying away in the Twin Otter. We actually had to land on skis coming into the area, and then we were able to take off with wheels at the end. And that's actually our first sunset in 4 months on the photo there that you can see. So Utah is Mars, as I've mentioned. This is Phobos Peak. This is out the window from the Mars Desert Research Station. One of my crewmates, Julia, took this photo. It's awesome. So I'd like to share it. And myself and Dr. Sarah Jane Pell are on the top of the peak here. And we're actually tying my shoelaces around my boot because the sole ripped off of my boots while climbing up the mountain. So you got to be creative. You got to be inventive in order to do these things. But also, real life on Mars is going to require this same creativity as well. If you look, I don't know if you see my mouse or not, but on the far right, just below the horizon, there's 4 white dots. That's where the Mars Desert Research Station is. So if you look at number 45 on the slide and it goes straight up, it'll be just to the right of that Factory Butte is the name of that one. So pretty picturesque area. I love going out there. I think it'll be a while. They need to work on some of the safety issues out there. But that's just part of, they've been operating for 2 decades. So our team was the International Space University alumni crew. And so my lab was involved with a lot of different research projects, again, looking at spacesuit mobility. And I was actually looking at dust intrusion into the habitat to see how much dust comes in from EVA from operations. So just another photo to show you some of these formations. So it's very alien-like and very Earth-like at the same time, of course. And this is just going into the gully of where some of the rocks are washed out. And then education is a big part of it. So my son was only 2 when I was on this simulation. And so I did a lot of things to connect with him back home. And I sent actually videos to my cousin in Thailand, to her students, to talk about Mars. And their questions are always a lot of fun too. So I think I only have a few more things just to kind of add to it. But other analogs aren't just like Mars looking things. So we saw Aquarius Reef Base used by the Aquanauts and NASA for training their NEMO missions. So this is what NEMO looks like. Essentially, it almost looks like an International Space Station module, but you're saturated once you dive to that depth. It's 60 feet in the water at the top of it, and I think 90 or 100 at the bottom of the whole rig. But you're saturated. You can't just pop up to the surface. You have to do a whole breathing protocol. You're dependent on your life support. High seas, so this is in Hawaii, so we've been involved with them. We just had 2 colleagues go there, Cyan Proctor and Aaron Bonilla, and Cyan's talking to the observatory tomorrow on Facebook, so make sure you catch that. The 3 of us have a company called Flight Ready Systems, and so this is also another study that we're doing at Embry-Riddle that I connected with them to collect data on EVAs, looking at heart rate and exploration terrain and things like that. The South Pole, I mean, you think of astronomy when you think about the South Pole, but actually the harsh winter, living there, wintering over, all of that is something similar to what a crew might have to face in a real lunar or Mars mission. And so, this is a great analog, is to send people there to winter over, or people that have the experience of had been at the South Pole in those extreme environments would be great candidates, of course, with the right background of everything else. Desert Rats is a test program by NASA, so they test hardware in Arizona. And then finally, the International Space Station is actually also a space analog for space. So it's very meta. But the crews spend about 6 months on average, or have, now we're looking at longer durations. But the 6 months is the same as what it would be to be weightless on the journey to Mars or the journey home from Mars. And so we really need to understand what happens to the human body in that environment. And that's why it's so important to focus, those stints of the ISS to be a length that is something that we need to study for future missions. And then finally, kind of like, dreams to reality. It starts with a Pat Rawlings drawing, which are the 2 on the right there. Eventually it gets upgraded to, it's staged photo, but that's after 4 months of living in the Arctic. And then, hopefully the next photo we see is somewhere, people like NASA team wintering over somewhere, or possibly on space station doing some sort of demo, or then again making it to the moon, to Mars. Beyond, sure, why not? But let's focus on the moon and Mars, because Mars really is the key for human existence. Yuri's Night was mentioned. It's the World Space Party. Started in 2001. April 12th, both the first human in space and also was the first space shuttle flight. So it's a cosmic coincidence of the date. And so places around the world usually celebrate this. This year was the online party, which was actually a lot of fun. It was, I think, 4 hours. And I was there like glued to the thing. There's just so much coolness going on. And then these are just photos from Yuri's Nights around the world. And hopefully we'll get back to these crazy, sweaty dance parties, where we really get to interact and, face to face and see each other. Top right there is actually Scott Perezinski on the summit of Everest holding up a Yuri's Night patch. And then in the middle there's actually star parties all over the world. That's just something I stole from the internet just to represent it. But that's very popular, and that's definitely something that, I don't work for Yuri's Night anymore, the nonprofit. I just help with the Kennedy Space Center event now for volunteers. But they actually had telescopes out at it the last couple of years. And this is a really important way of connecting people to space is actually seeing space, not just, what they typically see, because it's also having a guide, someone to walk them through what they're actually experiencing and seeing. So I encourage you to follow our lab on social media. Everything is at Spacesuit Up. And I guess I'll stop there. I don't know if we don't really have, I don't even know what time it is. We don't really have time for video, but the video is available. I'd rather do Q&A. And if no one asks any questions, then we'll do the video. So thank you for your attention on all of that. There's a lot. I know I talked a lot. I don't even know if anyone's still there. Hope you are.
Oh yeah, we've got a few questions piled up.
Okay, good. I like
Yeah.
questions.
All right,
Yeah.
you ready? Funding for analog, is that NASA? Is it private enterprise? How does that work?
So that's a great question, because it's kind of all the above. NASA actually pays for studies to be done at these locations. They actually organize some of their own series, like Desert Rats is a big NASA project that would bring all the different centers together to test together. They actually had the crew do a camp out in that electric vehicle that I showed for, I think it was 4 or 7 days, just to simulate what it would be like to live in there and how you would actually do the protocols of getting in a simulated spacesuit and everything else. For the most part, for the Mars Desert Research Station, it's pay to play. The rotations are 2 weeks, so people will form a group and put a proposal into the Mars Society, and then depending on if it's selected or not, then that group would have to find their own funding. One other example just of funding through the government is through NSPIRES. There's a program called P-STAR, Planetary Surface, technology. It's not augmented reality, but it's money. And the P-STAR program is just a way to fund researchers to use analog environments as well, with, I guess you can say, the cooperation or advisement of NASA personnel on their teams as well.
Great. We got a question from
if you have
Mark
money, you
and
can
Frank.
go, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question from Mark and Frank in the chat if you want to read it real quick. And
yeah. Let's see. So Mark says, I've wondered what the transparent material was used for the face mask. Is it glass, Corning glass? How thick is it? Distortion of vision. Okay, so great question. Oh man. So I'm trying to remember the actual material, but on the real spacesuits, it's actually a plexiglass type material, and they actually have embedded wires in it to help with the defogging as well. So there's some distortion, but very minimal. It's, they put a lot of money into making sure it's formed properly. The Apollo spacesuits actually was a whole glass top, like the whole thing was glass, and then the helmet part went on top of that, where the David Clark helmets is just the face part, like the front part is the visor that pops up and forward. The ones that are on the David Clark suit, the Boeing blue suit, that's a soft helmet. It's kind of hard to notice at first glance if you haven't seen it before, but it actually unzips and that helmet just flips back like a hoodie. And so they have to be very protective of that to make sure it doesn't get scratched and bent and everything else. So Frank asks, FMARS habitat Arctic looked really, really small. Yeah, it was. It was 8 meters in diameter, 2-story tuna can, and we call the one in Utah a tuna can in the desert. So some of the challenges sharing, what were some of the challenges sharing the space with so many people? And are those conditions the first Mars exposure expected to have? Great question. The larger the volume, the more air and consumables that you have to deal with. The more pressure structure has to, like the structure itself has to deal with maintaining its stability, if you will. That's a lot more air handling. So all those things scale up the bigger you make them. So you don't necessarily want to do that in terms of an initial or early exploration mission. But in terms of us living and actually being, psychologically sound and growing it into something like possibly like the South Pole, and then maybe one day moving into a whole colony, who knows? You would definitely need the volumes to have the psychological support of spacing things out. So for us, we had 7 people. There were only 6 rooms, which meant the 7th person actually had to live in the loft with all the food supplies. We built them a wall so they would have visual privacy, but they still had to go up there to crawl into them and stand up in. And not that our rooms were that glorious. Our rooms, you literally are less than my shoulder width apart, and I'm not even that big, straight in. And then I had kind of a lower bed, and then the room next to me actually was like kind of like Tetris. Their bed was on top of my bed. That doesn't really work, but I'll just wave my hands around. Their bed was the upper part of that column, if you will. So we had kind of L-shaped rooms, with only a few shelves, but we didn't bring a lot of stuff out there anyway. We brought enough for maybe a week of clothing, all dry fit type stuff that we could hand wash with a bit of water. We basically did like a drum of laundry, like one of these little camping drums, and like hand cranked it with water to wash them, and just hung things up to dry. And obviously, when you're camping, living like that, you don't really care about your smell after a while. You don't necessarily care about the other people's smell, but we kind of made each other shower. And since there's 7 of us, 7 days a week, so everyone showered on, at least once a week. Well, only once a week, I should say, because the shower was not a shower. It was basically freezing water falling on your head until you're like, that's enough, and then sponge around, like, soap it up and then rinse it out. So very small living quarters, no soundproofing either. I could hear someone pull a napkin out of like a tissue box the room over from me at nighttime. So things like, headsets and things were really important for being able to sleep properly. They were definitely dark in these little rooms, so that wasn't a problem. So these are all things that we need to think about. I think of the moon as more like a coal mining expedition where everything's going to be filthy, dirty equipment's going to be really banged up, and really have to find a way to keep the inside of things clean so that we can protect food, protect our lungs. Obviously, we don't want the dust getting into our lungs. It can actually have a lot of adverse effects. For those that aren't familiar, the moon has constantly been being bombarded by micrometeorites, but without any atmosphere, there's no weathering. So on the moon, all the particles, the small particles, are actually sharp as glass. And so that's why I was studying abrasion, because it was actually ripping apart the spacesuit materials, scratching visors, scratching dials. On Apollo 17, they wouldn't have even been able to go out for another EVA if they wanted to, because their pressure leaks were getting too high on the spacesuits. So all these things, environment, inside, outside, are all a big part of it. I hope I answered the question. I was kind of going all over the place because there's a lot more to share, obviously. So for Mars, yeah, I think they could expect to have minimal. The food, I just want to mention too, had to be shelf stable for 2 years. So we had some things that were canned, but very little. A lot of textured vegetable protein. So we had chicken, and we had meat, and we had to make things out of it. We actually had AeroGrow, so we were growing fresh lettuce, and that was kind of the highlight for each meal, is to have something like that in it as well. All right, so let's see. Samira's got a question about findings on what happens to the human body on the ISS over 6 months or longer compared to data of astronauts prior to an extended stay in space. So we're learning a lot about living in space and how to countermeasure all of the things that go not wrong, but that the way your body adapts to space in zero gravity. Your body has a fluid shift, so the fluid goes upwards. So you end up losing a lot of calcium because of that. And without loading your bones, they'll atrophy. So it's just like having osteoporosis. So you need to be able to exercise for both your bone and your muscle. But we're also learning about supplements, drugs, vitamins, things like that that can actually help the astronauts. And learning about those things is critical in order for them to be able to function. The crew goes on space station for 6 months. They come back to Earth. They need help getting out of the capsule and then move to the medical facility. And they're not allowed to drive for like a month because their like vestibular system's so messed up. So think about that in terms of Mars. We can't land a crew on Mars and they can't walk out of the capsule or maybe do something in an emergency situation on landing. They won't be ready to go. So we do have more to learn to make people kind of stronger and ready for that 1/3 gravity of Mars. Let's see. So Mike's asking about Titan spacesuit, Titan habitat. Where could you test that? And could you envision surface exploration on Venus, or will that be if ever, a Cloud City type habitat. So those are awesome. I love to think about sci-fi, and we started watching The Expanse. We're on season 3. So I'm learning a lot about Venus, of course, that way, right? No, these are very harsh environments. I might need a planetologist to step in here and correct me. So Venus would just absolutely crush you. I think it's 80 to 100 bar, like 100 times our atmosphere. So what's our best analogy for that is to go underwater. Actually, the first female EVA spacewalker just went to the deepest place of the Marianas Trench, Challenger Deep, and just returned a few days ago, I think, or a week ago, or within the last week. And so that's really exciting, but that's the type of technology that would have to withstand high pressures. We've had a lander on Venus, the Venera program. We've landed. They've lasted like less than an hour, half hour to an hour. So we're nowhere close to the technology to survive even hardware, let alone something that would have to hold air inside of it as well. So you got to keep that in mind too. The structure has to hold this air pressure that's a lot lower against a higher pressure. So it's a lot more like a submersible or something that way. So I guess the spacesuit might not be a suit. It might be like you're an avatar walking robot thing where you're controlling it and you have, your hands to help with the manipulation to be like the fine touch, if you will, but it might not be like what you would expect in terms of a gloved hand or something else like that. Cloud City would be really cool too. So Titan's surface atmosphere this is where I might need an assist. Is it the same, close to the same as Earth? I don't think it's actually that much higher or lower. I might have to, I don't want to Google it on the side, but someone want to Google that?
It's about 70% nitrogen. So
Yeah.
very similar to Earth's atmosphere. But the rest of the atmosphere is a mixture of organics, methane, ethylene,
Right.
various different other types of things like that. No oxygen in the atmosphere.
Right. I was wondering about the pressure though.
Yeah.
Titan pressure washer. That's not what I want. Titan's moon pressure. Here we go. It's denser than Earth, about 1.45 atmosphere, so about 1.5 Earth, and so it is a higher pressure, but it's not like Venus, which is absolutely crushing. There's a couple more here, I think. Let's see. Where am I? I don't know. Eric has some.
Eric, yes, Eric.
Here. Yeah. Let's see. Same spacesuits in space are the same as practicing in water. What's the cost of a suit? Okay, there's a lot of questions here. Okay, so the spacesuits they use underwater in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab by NASA are decommissioned suits that were used for space. They're a different grade level, if you will. They cannot go back to space. They're now no longer certified to be pristine enough to be in that environment because of safety. But they are the same hardware. Suits that are tested around the world are not necessarily, I guess you could say, real yet, because they are just learning about the hardware themselves, and so those are not necessarily suits. So only the Neutral Buoyancy Lab has suits, and of course over in Russia, very similarly as well. Cost. So the cost for an EVA suit, like the EMU, the white one that everyone's familiar with, is like $10 million, but that's not including a lot of the cost of development, research and development that goes into it. But the IVA suits are an order of magnitude lower. They're more like $250,000, like $250,000 or so, and up to $1 million. I mean, it depends on the suit. SpaceX is going to have a custom suit for each person. David Clark, I'm guessing they'll be custom just in the earlier years, but that is something that could be adjustable in the future. Is there a maximum amount of time a person can be in a suit? The answer is not really. And the answer is always it depends. I guess it depends, right? How long are you willing to be in your suit? And it really matters with the consumables. How are things going in and out of the suit? Otherwise, you could wear it. On terms of sci-fi, think of Dune. They had the still suit where they never took it off, and it just recycled or basically recycled all the bodily fluids. And so the emergency situation for a spacesuit right now in the earlier, like the Constellation program design, was to have, I think it was a 72-hour abort scenario, which would be from the moon back to Earth. So if you need to survive, you could be in that suit, and it would have either enough consumables or be able to be safe enough to be in. Okay. EVA conditions on Earth, person constant talking communication if they're monitored when they're EVA. Okay, so for the low Earth orbit International Space Station, they're not necessarily talking the whole time. And so for the simulations, it's kind of the same too. Where it differs is that when you go to a place like Mars, you're not going to have real-time communications with either a mission control or a mission support, because it might not be a mission control. They might not be controlling what's going on. And because of that, the crew will probably be in more chatty contact about what they're observing. Also because all the things the crew says, all the little observations actually are data. All of those things actually help with us understanding the terrain, the materials, even things like traction. They might mention something like, oh, I slipped. And it's kind of a running dialogue. And anyone who has small kids like I do knows that you end up just having a running dialogue anyway. That's how you develop it, and it's actually pretty helpful. So in the simulations, you're chatting, but you have radio comm, so it gets difficult because one person's trying to push or be on the radio. You could use voice activated, but the hardware doesn't work all the time. And actually, in a lot of the field sites, unless you have line of sight or some sort of repeater, you can't actually hear the crew in the field. So you actually have to have operational check-ins every hour or 2 hours saying, okay, we're going to check back in. We're going to climb up to that ridge and we're going to signal back to the base to let them know everything's fine, or if we're delayed, if we need a little bit more time, or if we need to wrap up early. So all those things would be important for communication. So we definitely want to build up infrastructure around whatever celestial body we go to help with that navigation and communication side of it as well. Okay, there's one more in the chat here, and then I'm kind of been chatting for an hour, I think, here. Oh, it's just 90 times the atmosphere. Okay, you would feel like you're swimming if you can survive the conditions, or swimming or pressed against the ground. I'm not sure. You'd be like, I guess it would be like swimming against a high volume of pressure. It'd be pretty wild, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah. So that's it would be like in a very high current pushing down on you and trying to kind of feel. It's kind of interesting. Simulation on that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ryan Kobrick. Appreciate it. Thank you, Tricia, for setting this up and coordinating this with Dr. Ryan. And thank you so much.
Yeah,
thanks, everyone.
Pretty cool. Thanks again, Ryan.
Yeah, and if you've got questions, I can pop my email in the chat here for any follow-up that's needed. If you want to visit the lab sometime in 2021, you're always welcome to come to Embry-Riddle. I don't know what's going to happen this fall. And I'm guessing there won't be a lot in the lab. But keep an eye out for these students. You might want to be hiring a bunch of them soon. Really awesome work that they're doing. They're involved with all these NASA challenges. Tomorrow, actually, our NASA Suits team is presenting their augmented reality headset to the world, I guess. And that's been really cool to watch them learn how to code HoloLens and be able to create a whole heads-up display for astronauts. And again, make sure you check out our video. I'll drop a link to that video from our website just so you have it as well from the YouTube channel. I think that's it. Now I'm done.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks again.
Yeah.
Really great talk. Okay, so now we will get into our mini programs then with CFAS. We're going to start off with the Astrophotos of the month that Derek curates from our members each month. So I'm just going to be quiet again and say, take it away, Derek.
All right, thank you, Richard. Okay, so obviously with the deluge of rain, we probably had about, raise your hand or give me a thumbs up if you bought some equipment lately. Because there are some members here that have bought some equipment. So we had tropical storm, we had constant rain. I mean, it was crazy. So unfortunately, we didn't have too many submissions this month because of the weather, but we did have some submissions. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. And so let me go ahead and get that all set up here. I don't know if that has submitted their photos. If you are here, or if you see your photo, please be sure to unmute yourself and mention a little bit about your photos. So definitely we appreciate that. So let me go ahead and share my screen here and we'll get started. So the first one is a submission from Laura. This is from the latest SpaceX Falcon launch, the one that has just launched another set of the Starlink satellites. Is Laura here?
Yeah,
tonight?
can you hear? I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can everyone else hear you?
I can tell you that this was taken on the causeway there at Cape Canaveral with the photographers. They allow a group of photographers out and everybody sets up, and it's interesting because they do a lot of radio broadcasts from there. So you're actually, as it's launching, you hear what they're saying on the radio to people. So it's interesting, pretty interesting.
Very cool. And what camera equipment did you use for this?
My Canon 70D, I did night shots. Night shots are tough. So I use a 400 8-400 set that I just do almost all my night launches. And that's 400 shutter, 1/400 shutter speed, the f-stop 8 and 400 ISO. It's just a standard that I use. It seems to work pretty good. This kind of has a green tint to it. I hope that's not what you all are seeing. Just showing up on my screen with a little bit of a green. It wasn't green that night, but anyway, so that's what I use.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a great image and always a fantastic experience to see a night launch over at the Cape. Our next image is, I believe, my image of the sun. A couple of weeks ago, Justin and I were invited by the foundation of the college to set up every year we participate in what's called the Dream Cup. And this event is to raise money for student scholarships and other programs for the college. And this year we wanted to do something unique. Normally we have the telescope set up of the sun. We sponsor one of the holes at the golf course, and we normally have the participants look through the telescope. But obviously with COVID and the pandemic going on, we did not want the people to look through the telescope. So we decided to set up the solar telescope with Justin's large TV. And a big shout out to Frank for letting us use his really nice lithium power station that allowed us to run everything for the entire time. And here we have an image of the sun that we took. We had a beautiful set of prominences that day, a bunch of fountain prominences. We had this big, giant, massive prominence that was going off. And being able and seeing the people react to that while they were ready to go golf was pretty cool, and getting a chance to show everybody a unique experience while they're at this event. So this was taken with an ASI 120 monochromatic camera. It's been recolorized using some of the features in PixInsight. Yeah, so this is an image from that day. This is kind of what the participants during that event got to see on that. So, all right, this is Barbara Harris's. Oh, I forgot to mention the telescope I was using was a Lunt 60 millimeter. It was double stacked, and I'll talk about more what double stacked is in the solar astronomy 101. So that way you have that going there. The next image is from Barbara Harris. Is Barbara here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great.
This is my annual picture of Barnard's star. This is the 7th year that I've taken a picture of Barnard's star in the first week of June. And I basically stack every image that I've taken to show the proper motion of the star. It's our fastest proper motion star, moving at 10.3 arc seconds per year. So not only do I take an image just for this, which is a cool little project that I've been doing. But it's also a variable star. So this was taken with a CCD camera on my 16-inch telescope using a V filter, and photometry was also performed on the image, giving a magnitude of about 9.567 from about 3 o'clock this morning.
All right, fantastic. And what gear did you use for this?
My 16-inch Meade with a Proline CCD camera, a V filter, which is similar to a green filter, and a 15-second exposure.
Fantastic. It looks great, Barbara. Yeah, and it's amazing to see the amount of movement. When I read it, what I read, it Barnard Star travels about 60 or so, where the radial velocity is about 60
Right.
miles per second. So that's crazy. So excellent. All right.
And also, it basically just the images are stacked and summed to get to show the movement.
Okay, yeah, definitely, yeah. So you got 2014 here and 2020, so 6 years of change there. So pretty neat. All right, our next image. This is an image that I took of the Omega Centauri globular cluster. And we only had a few little pieces of time to image this. This was over at the Geneva campus. So we only had about 2 hours worth of time to capture Omega Centauri above the trees. This was taken with my 190 millimeter Mac Newtonian telescope using a 6D cooled and modified camera. And this was about 25 2-minute exposures. Because I didn't really want to overexpose the core of the cluster, because you can do that pretty easily with Omega Centauri. So a lot of beautiful, orange, very very old globular cluster, over 10 billion years old. I like to call globular clusters kind of these retirement communities for stars way out in the depths of the galaxy, and these galactic halos, if you will. All right, our next image. Now, Frank, I know you didn't actually submit this, but you were really excited about it. I thought this would be, I kind of wanted to add some more photos to our astrophotography showcase. So I decided you were really excited about imaging this object. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure. This is a HOAGS object, which is a really weird ring galaxy 600 million light years away. So it looks like kind of a fuzzy, weird, blobby thing here, but it's really cool because it's a ring galaxy. Like, this is actually a galaxy that's just a ring of stars around that sort of central core with nothing around it. And they're very rare, so I just think it's a very fascinating object. And what's really cool is if you look at the Hubble image of this same galaxy, which has a lot more detail, there's actually another ring galaxy visible inside the ring of this ring galaxy. I mean, how unlikely is that? You might even say it's one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them.
Oh, jeez.
I said it. Anyway, this is about 5 hours of exposure time on a Mach Newtonian 190 millimeter with an Attic 383L plus camera.
All right, thank you, Frank. Yeah, no, it's really odd and interesting, and it's amazing that what do you know what the size of this object was? It has to be very, very small.
Yeah, I mean, the image resolution here is only about 1.1 arc second per pixel, and it's looking at it maybe 30 pixels across top, so really, really small.
Yeah, definitely. So it's pretty incredible. When we get these Hubble space images, you realize just how much how small these distant objects are when you look at them with a telescope like ours. But still incredible that we can capture this. I think it's wonderful. And there's actually some other smaller galaxies that are in there as well.
Yeah, if you really want to blow your mind, it's not really showing up too much on Zoom, but if you look at the original image, which is on the Facebook group, you can spot some really distant ones there that are even farther away. And, this thing's 600 million light years away. Think about how far away those galaxies are. So the fact that you can see that at all from suburban Orlando, I think, is pretty cool.
Exactly. Definitely. Well, thank you, Frank. Now we have a special, this is from the very far distant part of our universe. We had a submission from, I believe, Debbie, I think Debbie Vaughn, was that you that submitted this? Is she
Yes,
on?
it was.
Okay, all right, yeah. Do you want to talk about this?
Well, certainly. I think it's never too soon to share the stars with young ones. And so I was making this little baby busy box for my great niece, and we were supposed to put some stars in the sky, and I was so inspired since I hadn't seen Orion in so long with my own eyes that I decided to put Orion in here and have my little niece, my great nieces, see if they could find a constellation in their new present. But this is actually fairies. They're little finger puppets and all. So
Oh, that's
anyway,
cool.
my little outreach here.
Hey, I want one of these. That sounds really cool. All right.
Yes, and this was taken with the iPad flat camera.
Excellent. Great distance beyond there. All right. Well, thank you for all those that submitted their photos this month. And hopefully we'll have some better skies probably, hopefully maybe in a couple of weeks when we get back to New Moon. And if you're, some of us are reprocessing some of our older photos. So this is a great time to look back at your older images and go, I learned some new skills. And, reuse, take those old images, reprocess them, and send it to us. And we'll be love to take a look at those. So there you have it.
Thanks, Derek. And yeah, everybody. Okay, I had to make sure I was still, that I turned myself on. So I'm up next. I'm going to talk about the Astronomical League Observing Program. And let me share my screen. Second desktop. Start my little thing here. So our monthly observing programs from the Astronomical League, just a quick review. Every month we talk about a different observing program. Why should you do it? Get a pin and certificate from the Astronomical League. Everybody who's a member of CFAS is a member of the Astronomical League. Personal glory, help you set goals. It's a really great way to do, to have a structured learning exercise to learn the night sky or learn some different objects. And it is something that you can do by yourself and at your own pace. So you don't have to wait for someone else to be available. A lot of these programs, you don't have to go to any special dark site. And many of them, you don't even need real specialized equipment. And of course, this is a great way to advance your skills and knowledge. This is the Astronomy Club, after all. So, one of the reasons we're here is to advance our knowledge and appreciation of astronomy. So this month, I'm going to talk about the Lunar Observing Program. Now, before anybody says, Richard, are you having a senior moment? Nope, we're talking about the Lunar Observing Program 2. Yes, I have talked about this before, but there is a second follow-on to the Lunar Observing Program. Why should we study the moon? Well, it's very easy. It's up all month. It is light pollution. It's immune to light pollution. You can live in the city. Even when it's a little bit hazy, you can get out there and look at it. And to some degree, you can even make a lot of observations naked eye or with this telescope. Now, the observations for the Lunar Observing Program 2 are a bit more in-depth. We're kind of taking it up to the next level. You are going to record some additional information about the things on the moon that we're going to look at. In particular, this particular observing certificate involves sketching. So you are going to sketch all of the targets on the moon. So this is going to improve your sketching skills. But also, I used to, there was a talk I've given several times on photography, how when you take a photograph, you look at things differently and you study them. Same thing happens when you sketch something. You really study something when you're sketching it, and you're going to remember that object, and you're going to remember a lot of those details more so than if you just looked at it in the eyepiece and had moved on. There are over 100, well, there's 100 different observations, and some of the observations will take into account libration, so you won't be able to look at, you won't be able to make the observations unless it's a favorable libration of the moon, which means that the moon appears to rock back and forth a little bit. So there, we see about an extra 10% of the moon on the east and the west sides. And so as things come around there, and you're going to, some of these observations are the same object, but you're going to observe them and sketch them under different lunar illumination angles. There are also 6 optional challenge objects that you can, or challenge observations, I should say, that you can substitute. So you can, and some of these are through different colored filters. If you want to be a really learn the moon, the first lunar observing certificate is a great way to get that started. But the second lunar observing ticket is really, this is the master's degree or the PhD program, if you will, in the Astronomical League observing when it comes to the moon. But wait, there's more, because you can observe the moon or you can photograph these. So this is one of the few Astronomical League programs where you can do photographs of your observations. So you can do 100 sketches or you can do 100 photographs of these features of the moon. It's exactly the same sorts of observations. You're just going to do them photographically. You'll notice here on the left-hand side, one of my observing logs with a photo of, with a drawing of the moon. Now, I'm going to admit I set the bar pretty low here with this drawing. I drew this rather hurriedly out in the during the haze, and I wanted to do that because I'm like, people are going to be afraid to show their drawings. They're going to be bashful. So I figure if the president of the club can show something that looks like it was drawn by a 3rd grader, you can probably do better than this. Or if you can't, we'll just wallow together in our skills. But I'm going to do this every month, and I hope that you will too, and our sketching and note-taking skills will get a little bit better. In fact, I'm sort of going to skip over the next slide. This is the same slide every month. To participate, send it to me, your Alcor coordinator. You can also go through the Astronomical League. There was a question about that one month, and I looked that up, and apparently, perhaps in the past, you weren't able to do that. But you can actually do that now. But please come through me, just because we want to recognize you in CFAS. We want to recognize you at the meeting, that you are an amateur astronomer. You're not just watching astronomy on TV. You are actually doing some observing and learning, and we think that is creditworthy. Now, I am going to steal part of Derek's observing challenge each month. An epiphany I had was I didn't get any of Derek's observing challenges this month because it's been raining or foggy, and I didn't want to get up at 5 in the morning. And I actually did get up at 5 in the morning once, but it turned out it was cloudy for me and not for everybody else. But as I said earlier, the moon is very forgiving of weather. I mean, unless it's raining or really, really overcast, a lot of times you can see the moon naked eye and with the telescope with a little bit of haze under conditions you would never think about doing astrophotography, or you would never drag your big Dob out to do some deep sky observing. So each month, alongside Derek's observing deep sky challenges and planets as well, I'm also going to issue a few lunar challenges. And so this month, we're just going to keep it small, just 4 craters. These are, we're going to focus on craters this month. And these are very popular craters. So the kind of the highlights, the best of the, like those music shows, the best of the 80s, the best of the 90s. Well, here's 4 craters that are really amazing craters that you've probably heard of. Tycho or Tycho, I've heard it pronounced both ways. I have no idea how you're supposed to say it. I like Tycho for no reason other than that's how I have always said it. And so my prejudice and bias says it's Tycho, even if Sandy Wood calls it Tycho. Kepler, Plato, and Petavius. I also have no idea if that's how you say Petavius. Petavius is a really cool crater. I would encourage you to look at that and sketch it, or at least look at it and observe it under different lighting angles during the month. It's got a central peak, and it's actually got a little ring around it. When I photographed it once, it had 2 sets of rings around it. And I thought, oh, this is stacking artifacts. I got some kind of weird thing. And I looked it up in the Lunar Atlas, and no, my photograph was correct. It actually does have like a little 2 trenches that go all the way around the craters. So it's pretty cool. And that's it. So that's this month's challenge. Part of this month's challenge, the lunar challenge, and of course the lunar observing certificate too. I plan to do this certificate myself, so I would encourage you to do the same. And I'm going to turn off my screen sharing. Up next is Derek's observing report and his observing challenge. So I'm going to be quiet. Are you back, Derek? I don't see a picture of Derek.
Yes, I'm here. I'm just trying to make Stellarium look really nice. So
that's Derek is preparing.
Yeah,
understood. Don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Pretty much.
He's turning the knobs and pulling the levers to get things just the way.
All right. Well,
the way they need
the Milky Way is not wanting to show up, but that's okay. We don't need to worry about the Milky Way in this episode. All right. So thank you, Richard. This month I'm going to keep it light for you all because of the fact that we have really unpredictable weather. We have 2 challenges this month. But before we do that, I want to share with you all some of our observing challenge participants from last month. We had 2 participants, and I want to go ahead and show some of these. They submitted their photos, and I wanted to share with you all some of their really cool work. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my desktop since it'll be a little easier. So this is an image from Bill Castro of M82 and M81 of his viewing there. So there you got the 2 galaxies there. And here is his report of the of M81, M82. So thank you, Bill, for that. It looks great. Our next image, this comes from Len Ward. Len Ward, I gotta say that's a pretty impressive view of Jupiter you got there. So that's a really great image of Jupiter, and you see you got the great red spot just at the edge of the planet there. So looking great there, Len. Thank you for sharing your image with us. And then we have a couple more from Bill Castro. This is his Jupiter image. We can see we have the Galilean moons with our image of Jupiter. And seeing was actually pretty good. That's very nice there. So great image there, Bill. We have another object. Bill was on a roll here this month. He got the image of M3. So there we are. So you can see that's his view of M3. It's a nice globular cluster right there. So great view there, Bill. And we have one final submission, and that is, of course, Saturn. So congratulations, Bill Castro. You are the observer of the month. So you are, we don't really have a prize other than just you can brag that you observed, you were the observer of the month. But we want to see more of your submissions. As Richard mentioned, don't feel, pressured to make it look super hyper realistic. Just, we want you to get out there. We want you to look. We want you to observe. I can tell you that Richard's drawing is better than my drawing of the moon. So that's why I do photography, because I don't have the gift of art. So you don't feel bad about how you draw it. Just get out there, have fun, observe, and all that. Okay, so right now you can see I'm looking at Stellarium here, and we're going to look towards the south this month, and we're going to look kind of over to the southwest. The time right now is set to 10:35. That's kind of the time that we have to wait pretty long because we're getting closer and closer to the summer solstice. So we're reaching the longest day of the year for us here in the Northern Hemisphere. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and bring up the constellation labels and lines here so you can see where everything is. What we're going to do is we're going to look over in this part of the sky here towards the southwest. We'll see these 4 stars that look like a diamond shape. This is Corvus the Crow. And we're going to kind of look in this general area of the sky here. And this is our first observing challenge of the month. All right, so we're going to be looking tonight for an area known as the Sombrero Galaxy. This is one of my favorite galaxies to observe in the sky, and it's in a fairly decent part of the sky this time of year. So we're going to go ahead and zoom in on it there. You can see There's our lovely spiral galaxy there. Edge on, we got this really nice dust lane, a great object to draw. So if you can draw a dusty thing with like a black streak on it, you've done it. So there you go. So there's the Sombrero Galaxy M104 that's located just north of this star here in Corvus. That's Algorab right there. That's the claws of Corvus, the crow. And it's in between Algorab and Spica, which is the primary star in Virgo. So you kind of want to look in this general area here, see if you can find M104. Now, the other object I want to look at this month is we're going to head over kind of near the zenith of the sky. And you'll see the bright star Arcturus here. Arcturus is the primary star in Boötes. And over to the left of Boötes, we can see the star Alphecca or Gemma. And Alphecca is the bright star in Corona Borealis, which is the northern crown there. But we're going to continue on, and we're going to head south of Corona Borealis, and we're going to see the what we call the keystone of Hercules right here. And this is going to be the next this is the next observing challenge that I want you all to do this month, and that, of course, is the Great Hercules Cluster. So we had M3 last month. Now it's time to take a look at M13, and we can go ahead and zoom on it. And this is a beautiful globular cluster to look at a telescope. It's one of my favorite globulars actually to look at through a telescope. It just has a very defined profile to it. So here we have two objects this month, M104, the Sombrero Galaxy, and M13, the Hercules Cluster. So get out there, do some observing, and hopefully we'll have some clear skies. So there you go. So I'm going to go ahead and write those down right now. So this is your observing challenge. It's M104 and M13. All right, so good luck, everybody. Happy observing.
Thank you, Derek. We're going to change the order a little bit. We're going to let Francisco go next, and then we'll finish up with Derek's solar observing talk. If you are ready to go, Francisco?
Yes, I am.
Yes, okay.
Hi
Take
everybody. Well, just want to have a three-slide PowerPoint presentation here to showcase the learning programs that CFAS has for our members. Let me start by going over here. Actually, I have to share my screen first. Okay. Okay. So as everybody must know, we have a learning programs that provides a member with learning telescopes for 30 days for regular membership and up to 90 days for patrons. If you want all the telescopes, the most convenient place to do that transfer is at our storage location that we have in Oviedo in the corner of 419 and Old Lockwood Boulevard. There's a storage place there that we have one of those places. We can make special arrangements if you live close to my work, or we can meet halfway to your place. We can do that. All you have to do is just ask and see if we can do that. You can arrange to reserve a telescope by contacting me, and this is my email here. I would not provide my telephone on the website. You know why everybody start calling from all other places and selling me all kinds of stuff, especially those I can't warranty that expired a while ago. So, and this is the link on the website, cfas.org, CFAS Learning Telescope Scopes. Here are some of the telescopes that we have and what you can check out. These might not be actual pictures of them, but some of them are. Not all of them are available at this moment. Some of them are already out on with other members. I know this is not a good time of the year for you to check out a telescope, because the moment you take one out, it's going to start raining again. But there you go. You can have it whenever the telescope is available. We have, this is a sky watcher. We have one sky watcher that was recently donated by a member that was downsized in his household and didn't have room for the telescope, so he donated a 6-inch Dobsonian sky watcher, pretty much in mint condition. Actually, that one is reserved by Samira, so we have to talk about when she's gonna pick it up and all that. We have a 12-inch Dob. It's a big telescope, so you need to have a big car to transport that one. That one is available. That one has no eyepieces, but I think I can get some eyepieces from my old stock there, and just you can use. It's not a go-to. You see there, that's not the actual picture of the telescope. That you can see a hand controller, an electronic hand controller there, but it's not a go-to. It's a push to. We have a Meade LX90 8-inch telescope with GPS and AutoStar, and it's a go-to telescope. It's a nice scope for somebody that is beginning and wants to start doing some, electronic stuff. We have 2 Celestron SE 8-inch go-to telescopes. They are available for checkout. All of those telescopes have been donated by some CFAS member in respect. So we have a Celestron AVX mount, go-to mount with a GPS. Can be used to put one of the other telescopes that don't have a mount that you will see in a short while. This mount was recently donated along with another of the Celestron SC 8-inch and some other bunch of equipment, including a really nice set of TeleView eyepieces that are being used for outreach right now. We have another Orion 8-inch go-to telescope. This one is out already with one of the members. We have a that's an Orion 100 millimeter refractor that you can put in that as the AVX mount from Celestron. We have a 40 millimeter Coronado calcium telescope, solar telescope. And usually that telescope we pair with the iochrome mount. It's also available for checkout. Or if you have your own mount, you can just take the OTA and put it on your own mount. We also have a TeleView NP101 Genesis refractor. It's a really nice scope, but we bought that about probably 2 years ago from another member. Really sweet telescope. I think it's an F7 telescope. We also have a couple of homemade Dobsonians that I highly recommend for people that are beginning. And if you are new to astronomy, my suggestion is go to a couple of outreach events, star parties, and from the beginning and see how each one of them has to be set up so that you have an idea which one will be better for you, how technical you are, because people tend to think that a go-to telescope will be easy. Well, if you are beginning, I will tell you, you might spend 5-10 minutes trying to find the sun, that bright sun right in front of you, and you cannot put it in the eyepiece because the filter is blocking 99.98% of the light. So it's always good to start with after you graduate from binoculars, you go to a push-through telescope. That way, not only you learn the sky, but get familiar. One of the things that's about all the equipment. Just send me an email. We can talk on the phone, and I'll let you know what is available. One thing that I want to say is that if you go to the link for the webpage, it's being worked on right now. So I took it down and left just a generic page there. Hopefully within the next week, should be, better and improved, and you might have a better idea of what we have and what's available and how to contact me. One of the things that we ask from you and your responsibility is that you return your equipment in time. We are flexible. I'm not saying that the 30 days are up and you have to rush over, but usually people are enthusiastic about picking up the telescope, but when it's time to return it, there's a bunch of hoops that I have to jump to get it back. I mean, I'm not saying that you can keep it for a few more days, but if I need it because I have somebody waiting for it, I want you to think about that other fellow astronomer that might be waiting to use that telescope. So just take your time to same effort that you put in to get the scope to return it back. And another thing is, and I think that's the last thing, is that you cannot transfer the telescope from you to another member. It has to come back to me just for traceability. Because if you transfer that telescope to somebody else and you forgot an eyepiece or something is broken, we need to know, because that person might get there and say, oh, well, I didn't get that part, I didn't get this. So it's better to come back to us, even if it's your neighbor. At least we can get all three together and go from me to them again. So if you have any questions, please just send me an email to the link that I previously put in there. Okay, that's all I have, and thank you, Richard.
Well, thank you, Francisco, for putting that together. I think we're very, very fortunate as an astronomy club. We have quite the pool of loaner gear inside of this club since I've known the club. We've acquired and disposed of some equipment here and there over the had a Mulan for a while and a Tech 140. We've had some very premium, very nice premium gear that was available, and we've got a lot of nice scopes now that people can try out. And as Francisco said, once we can get back to doing our get-togethers, coming to a star party or an event is the best way to try out a lot of different telescopes and to talk to people. Are you happy with this type of telescope? And get some experience in that. So anyway, thanks again.
Two things another thing that I forgot to mention, and it should be up on the website, is that we have for people dabbling into astrophotography, we have an ATIC video camera and also have an old Malincan that is available. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to set up because it's all technology, but they work. If you want to deal with that, it's also available. Right. So hopefully within the next week, the website, the page for the Loaner Telescope program should be up to date.
Right. And I didn't mention it at the beginning, but the website is undergoing a revamping. We appreciate everybody's patience with it. It is surprisingly, it takes a surprising amount of time, and Francisco and Eric, we've got quite a few people who are involved in that revamping. And Groups.io is really going to be our official. If you're a member, Groups.io is going to be our main avenue of distribution of information. We'll mirror that, of course, on Facebook. But Facebook is, it's very popular. A lot of people like to use Facebook, but it is going to be the secondary. It's not the primary official CFAS means of distributing information. And the website is really going to be more of a people who aren't in the club, for them to find out about the club and find out what they need to know about the club. And then, of course, once you join, we'll have everything available on Groups.io. So with that said, it is, okay, we're coming up on 2 hours. I thank everybody for hanging in with us for tonight. We have one last mini program. I'm looking forward to it as well. Derek is going to talk about solar observing, because you don't have to wait for it to get dark. The nearest star to the Earth is, of course, the sun, and you don't have to stay up late to watch it. So take it away, Derek.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for hearing me several times this meeting, but I was really excited. I was asked to do a program on this with another organization, and wanted to share with you all this Solar Observing 101. This is the sun is usually between the hours of 8 a.m. to noon, you get good seeing conditions. The sky is generally clear. Like today, for example, it was beautiful this morning. So I popped out the H-alpha telescope and got a chance to view the sun, and it was spectacular. Didn't get any imaging today, but it was still just nice to look at the sun. So you know, that's kind of a normal weather pattern for Florida, is you get these, you know, obviously clear mornings, early afternoons, then the storms build up, then you get the storms, and then usually by early morning, like between the hours of 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., the skies clear up completely and you get a nice, steady, good seeing, observing. But of course, most of us don't want to get up that early in the morning, and so what's the next best thing? And that, of course, is to observe the sun. So Solar Observing 101, this is intended for more of a general overview of solar observing, so we're not going to get into really nitty-gritty details. Maybe this could be something we could do for a education program. Anna Metke is our education chairperson. So you can we can set up something for that later on if you want to get into the nitty gritty of solar observing. So this is more kind of a general overview to kind of get started. Now the number one most rule, and I'm sure all of you remember this back from grade school, is do not look at the sun. It will hurt your eyes. And Justin and I, we do a lot of programs with children for the planetarium, and the kids just have this Baby Yoda. I'll let you know, Baby Yoda is not looking at the sun, so don't worry, Baby Yoda is okay. He's not going to hurt his little Baby Yoda eyes. But you do get a lot of children that dare other children to look at the sun. This is not a good idea. So, of course, the number one rule when I'm doing solar observing, and if you look at your controllers on your telescope mounts, generally 9 out of 10 times you tell it to go to the sun, it will give you a warning to never look at the sun. This is not this is serious business. We've had certain individuals, we won't mention names, but there were certain powerful individuals in the world government that tried to look at the sun, and unfortunately, you know, that's something we do not want to do. So number one, very important disclaimer, never look at the sun with your eyes. But the next best thing is, what do you do? Let's say, for example, you don't have a telescope. You don't have, you know, what do you do? Well, one of the things you can do is you can look at the sun with your eyes using special solar glasses. So the top image up here is me and my wife, Lisa. This was during the total solar eclipse back in 2017. You can see us here with our awesome eclipse shades. And the thing about this eclipse glasses is that you don't just have to use them to look at the eclipse. You can look at them with the sun. And so Justin and I, during our outreaches for kids and our programs at the planetarium, we actually get them to look through the solar glasses at the sun. And the reaction is always like this over here. Everybody is super excited, just impressed by being able to see the sun with their eyes safely. And these actually are, I call them steampunk solar eclipse glasses. If you don't know what steampunk is, ask me later. I'll be happy to explain it to you. But basically, these are old welder's glasses that have been modified with special solar viewing glass. So that has been modified there. Now, to get these really awesome glasses, you can go to rainbowsymphony.com. In my opinion, Rainbow Symphony is the best place to get these glasses. They're ISO certified. It's the International Standardization Organization. And these are the ones that are legit, and they make a great product. And they do last for a very long time. People have asked me how long their eclipse glasses last. They do last quite a while, for many years if you actually take care of them. So the first things first is you want to get some solar eclipse glasses. The next option is looking into getting a pair of solar binoculars. I just realized I did not have the slide in here, so I apologize. But later on, there's a website called at Lunt Solar Systems. They sell these sinoculars. They're 8x32 binoculars that have solar filters on them. This is a great way to observe the sun as well. And you can take them with you anywhere you go, and great for outreaches as well. Now, the next step from this, you got your solar eclipse glass, you got your viewing. Let's say you want to get some better views of the sun, in particular the sun's surface. We call that the photosphere. On the sun's surface, we can see these magnetic disturbances on the sun caused by magnetic fields puncturing and revealing the convection cells of the sun. These are sunspots. We're finally getting some sunspots forming on the sun right now. The next best thing is you can look in getting a thing like a sun spotter. This is actually something you can purchase. The way it works, we actually have one at the planetarium. What you do is you basically, it sits on a saddle here that you move up and down, and essentially you get the sun's light to bounce off of this set of mirrors, and eventually it projects a view of the sun like you see here on this image of the sun. So if you have a really nice pair of sunspots on the sun, you can see them that way. You don't have to put your eye up to a telescope and potentially damage your eye. So this is a very safe way, easy way for people to observe the sun as beginners. And it's a fun tool for use for outreach. This is a great tool to have set up during the day. You can even just easily just pop it out of your garage, point it towards the sun, and take a look at the sun, especially when we get out of solar minimum and we start seeing more and more sunspots on the surface of the sun. Now, if you're a DIYer, the next option is something that you might want to look into. Gentleman, I can't remember his name, and if you do know the name of this gentleman, go ahead and leave a message in the chat box. But he designed this thing called the sun gun. Basically what he did is he took a plastic flower pot that he got from Home Depot or Lowe's, and he cut a hole out of it and attached a piece of PVC pipe that he then was able to attach to his telescope. This is just a standard 60 millimeter refractor, and used a piece of fabric in the back here to create a projection of the sun. So it looks really, really interesting. People will look at you and go, what in the world is that person doing? But when they look at it, they can see the sun with those really nice sunspots there. So this is a great tool as well to look at the sun, and also a great way to do it, again, in a safe way. It doesn't allow you to look at the sun directly, but you also want to consult and figure out your focal length of your telescope, how far you need to set the sun projection from the telescope focus point, all that stuff. So this will take a little bit of practice, a little bit of finagling, but if you're a DIYer, that's kind of the whole point, right? The whole point is to mess around with it, to kind of tinker with it and make it awesome. So this is a project you could do over the summer. It's raining, you're staying at home because of Corona. Why not make a sun gun? Why not do that, right? Now, the next step after that is what if you wanted to look at the sun with an eyepiece? And the next best thing is to set up a solar filter. This in particular is a white light filter. A white light filter basically filters out 99% of the light coming from the sun. That is basically the visible spectrum of the sun in full spectrum, the entire spectrum of the sun, and that's what we see as white light. And in white light, our view is primarily the photosphere. The photosphere is extremely bright. The surface of the sun is extremely bright, and that's pretty much most of the sunlight coming from the sun in the visible spectrum of light. And this is what we see here. And these are specific types of filters. So this one here, I don't remember whose telescope this is, but I think it might be Bill Castro's in the back there. I'm not sure, but this is a filter here made out of a mylar film that you can purchase in large sheets from companies like Demeter Planetarium. It's pretty easy to make. They actually already sell pre-made ones, different companies like Orion, Celestron, some of the other manufacturers like Thousand Oaks, which is a famous, very reputable solar filter company, Thousand Oaks, and I'll go ahead and leave some links for you in the chat. And then you also have these glass filters that reflect, these mirror filters that basically reflect 99% of the light. And these are designed, through companies like Orion, Meade, Celestron. All the big ones make these glass filters. And these are also now, of course, the difference between the two. Why do you want to get a glass versus a mylar? The mylar are cheaper, for one. It's cheaper to do it that way. However, you can risk creating holes. I don't recommend these Mylar filters primarily for outreach because unfortunately I had an event one time where a gentleman had his child, he was holding his child and the child literally smacked the filter and cracked the Mylar. And thank goodness nobody was looking through the telescope. And but the glass is much more durable, less prone to getting cracks and things like that. And it's always important before you put the solar filter on your telescope to put the filter in front of your face and look at the sun and see if you see any pinholes. If you see any pinholes of light, that gives you an opportunity to see, okay, will this be a serious concern of the amount of light entering? Even just a smaller than more than 1% of the light coming from the sun can be damaging to your eyes. So it's very important to keep these in good condition, make sure that they're covered. A lot of times people will get these really nice microfiber satchels that they put them in. Again, very important to take care of these filters so they last a long, good time. And these are some of the views that you'll get through your white light filter. This is actually an image of a large sunspot taken with my smartphone through our 11-inch Schmidt, our Aplanatic Schmidt, our Edge HD telescope. And you can see this is a really great way to observe sunspots. And this was using a glass solar filter. You do get a little bit higher definition with a glass filter over a Mylar filter, but it's not that noticeable, especially not invisible, with your eyes. But through photography, you do notice a little bit of a difference with that, but very, very minimal. So that's my next, this is another image in the white light filter. You can see this is during the Mercury transit. Here we have the planet Mercury going right in front of the sun there, right as it enters the edge of the sun. And then another thing you can do with white light filters is you can image the ISS as it transits in front of the sun. Actually, tomorrow at 7:37 here in Central Florida, the ISS is actually going in front of the sun. And I'm planning to set up my telescope to image that, hoping to maybe get a little tiny silhouette of the Dragon capsule. And what I'm hoping for is to get the ISS cross right in front of that sunspot that's currently on the sun. So you can also use your white light filter to image the ISS, and that could be a whole nother mini program at some time in the future to talk about how you can image the International Space Station during transits. Now, the next option, this is primarily designed for photographers, but you can technically use these visually, but it's a little bit more not dangerous. I don't like to use the word dangerous, a little bit more cautious. Are these things called Herschel wedges. And Herschel wedges, what they do is they block 95% of the light coming from the sun. The sunlight hits this hot surface plate here. And usually some of them some of them have cooling fans, some of them just go direct. And 95% of it goes there. It bounces off of a mirror. Basically, it's a diagonal prism. And then usually what's attached here is a neutral density filter that filters out the remaining amount. It's actually polarized. It's a neutral adjustment density filter, so you can actually adjust the percentage of light. And by doing that, it gives you a much higher definition view of the sun. So this is an image taken with one of these Herschel wedges. You can see that you have more fine definition of the photosphere. You can see the granulation, the bubbling of the convection layers underneath the surface of the sun. You can see various different other features surrounding the sunspots. Little tiny flare groups and these called Elmer bombs and all these other interesting features that we can see on the photosphere. A Herschel wedge is great for astrophotography. I don't necessarily think it's great to visually look through them because I'm a little bit more cautious. It depends on, I most prefer to use Herschel wedges generally for astrophotography, but you can technically use them for visual, but it's better to just use a regular white light filter for that. But people have had success with Herschel wedges visually, but they're really, really, really great for astrophotography of the sun. Now, the next step up from that, so we've been talking about white light filters. That's, again, the full spectrum of light visually coming from the sun. If you look at a specific narrow bandwidth of the sun's light in a certain spectra line, we get the spectral line called hydrogen alpha. And the hydrogen alpha spectral line allows us to look at what's called the chromosphere. And the chromosphere is this layer of gas that sits above the photosphere. It's usually blinded or intensified by the photosphere. We don't see it, but by using the hydrogen alpha, either a telescope like the one we see here on the left, this is a Lunt hydrogen alpha telescope, or we can use a hydrogen alpha adapter like the Daystar Quark, or they also have their other more dedicated hydrogen alpha equipment. You can see those spectral lines of hydrogen alpha. And by using hydrogen alpha, you can get these really amazing views of things like prominences, filaments, which are basically shadows casted by prominences that are edge-on, some really incredible convectional layer zones found in the chromosphere, some really cool stuff. And this is where, when you look at the hydrogen alpha, you can get these details of these large prominences, basically plumes of hot gas that are pushed up by these magnetic fields as they twist and tangle up. And you get these amazing loops and fountains, and you get these things called spicules, which are little tiny pieces of the sun's. They're just shooting up from the surface. Now I say tiny, we're talking 1,000 to 10,000 miles in height. But some of these can get very large. This one here is about 25 to 30,000 mile in size prominence. And of course, these are those filaments. These are those prominences that we can see that are casting shadows on the chromosphere of the sun. So again, you can see so you got white light, which you can see the photosphere of the sun. Hydrogen alpha, you can see the chromosphere of the sun. And normally, you can only see the chromosphere of the sun during a total solar eclipse, but because of the photosphere basically being completely obscured by the sun, or excuse me, not the sun, the moon, and but this will give you an option to look at that. Obviously, hydrogen alpha telescopes are more expensive, but they provide a view that is spectacular. And the last one I want to talk about are these calcium filters. So calcium, as we learned in our last star party, thank you, Frank. Calcium filters are used because obviously our sun is a population 2 star. It contains impurities. It's not a pure star. It does contain other heavy, rich elements, including metals. And calcium just happens to look very aesthetically pleasing to the eye. That's apparently the reason why we use calcium filters, is because they're just nice looking. As you can see here, they just look very beautiful. And this gives you another kind of interesting view of the photosphere of the sun, getting some rich detail. So it was really neat. You can combine all three. You get the chromosphere, the photosphere, and white light, and calcium here. And you can get a really interesting view of the sun. Some people actually multi-layer these images together and get an astounding view of our sun. So yeah, so that's kind of a quick overview of solar observing. There's different scopes you can get, different types of technology you can get. So really, all I ask you to do is take and grab a hold of the sun and enjoy it. And of course, even if you can't really get your hands on a telescope, just go outside, look at the sun, look at the sunset, have a great time. And so hopefully you all get a chance to do some solar observing this summer, and stay cool. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Derek. That was a great overview. So, all right, so I have a quick question. Any of the board members, is there anything that I have forgotten to bring up? Club-wise, business-wise, coming events? I believe we have a workshop. I don't know if the workshop was chiseled in stone. Can we announce that workshop that's coming up, Derek or Anna? You're muted too, Derek.
So we're actually moving the date of the workshop. I have the opportunity. I kind of have to keep it hush hush, but I have the opportunity to go dive at a lunar or a meteorite impact site in South Florida with a researching group. So that happens to be the same day. So Anna and I are currently working on a new date, but it should be close around that time. But right now we're looking at doing a planetary imaging workshop. So that was part of the current based on the poll that we received. But I'll let Anna talk about some of the other education programs as well.
Anna, she may not be with us.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so the last board meeting we were talking about some workshops. So we are working on some workshops. We had tentatively scheduled the planetary one, and looks like Derek and Anna are working on a new date for that. Next month we're going to do one on nightscapes and composition and processing. Derek and I are going to do that one together, and so we will keep an eye on Groups.io and on Facebook for word of that coming out. And until then, or until next month, I hope everybody stay safe, take care of yourself and your loved ones, and keep looking up. And hopefully we'll get a few somewhat clear skies in. And take care. See you all again then next month.